Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ram Kundanani from London West Branch of BCS. Today we have distinguished speakers, Professor Ashley Briganza and Dr. Weifeng Chen. They'll be talking with. They'll be talking about the business culture, leadership, management, and AI. I pass on to Professor Ashley to start this talk. And we are sorry for this delay. This is because of some technical problems we are experiencing. Now they have been resolved, and I hope that everything should be fine. Over to you, Professor Ashley.
Great, Ram, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, let me just add to what Ram was saying. He's being very polite when he says there was a technical glitch. What he's not perhaps saying is that I was the technical glitch because for some reason my sound had decided not to work today. But anyway, here we are. Apologies for the slightly later start. I'd like to start by thanking Ram and Altaf for giving us this opportunity to come and talk to you. This is the third in the line of 3 sessions that we've run. If you've attended any of our previous sessions, it's great to have you back. With me is my colleague, Dr. Weifeng Chen. He and I have been working very closely in this area of AI, and we, by way of background, are working in the Center for AI at Brunel. I founded the center, and Weifeng is one of the founding members as well. And we are interested in looking at the effects of AI on at 3 levels: at a societal level, at an organizational level, and at an individual or a personal level. And so the series that we've been covering has been looking at the effects of AI in these various guises. And what we want to cover today is this notion of leadership management and culture. And I have to tell you that this area is just so big, and there is just so much that is out there, that what we have really struggled with is just to try to package something together that is coherent, and I'm hoping you will find it coherent, to package something together to cover these 3 very large topics, which I have to tell you, I have run up to week-long sessions on some of these topics, but to try to boil it all down into an hour. So hold on, buckle up, and we're going to do a very quick ride through the effects of AI on leadership management and culture. Weifeng, if I may ask you to go through the next slide, please. Great, thank you. So what we're looking to cover is really looking at how leadership itself is changing, okay, and how that, and some ideas on what that means for leaders in organizations. But management is also changing, and we need to understand how management is going to be transformed going forward. Clearly, if you're familiar with the literature and discussions on leadership and management, the lines between leadership and management can sometimes be very blurred, but I just wanted to kind of pull these apart a little bit for the purpose of the discussion today. I also want to talk about this whole notion of culture in an AI environment, and what does it mean, and how will we recognize it? What are the factors that are going to affect an organization's culture, and how can we begin to get our heads around that? And then we're going to close with a few actions for leaders and managers. And in between these topics, and as much to give you a break from listening to me go on and on, part of what we said throughout these sessions that we're running is the research that we're doing is very active, and we are very interested in co-creating knowledge. So at a couple of points through the presentation, we're just going to pause, and I would ask and request if you could help us, please, by completing a very short survey This is not about marketing. It's not about trying to sell you something. It's really trying to understand the whole notion of organizational readiness for AI. And the questions are really in and around asking you to mark on a 5-scale continuum whether you agree with a set of statements related to AI readiness. If you could complete that, that would be very helpful. And what we are looking to do then is, if you give us your email address, we'd be more than happy to share the results of the survey when we have them. It's not a hugely complex survey. It asks you nothing about your personal, there's no personal information involved, and we have got ethical approval to conduct the survey from Brunel, just to be sure. So yeah, Weifeng, if I could ask you to go to the next slide and then fairly quickly go to the slide after that as well. So we're going to talk about leadership and how leadership is changing. So that's the first topic for today. Weifeng, next slide, please. So whenever you read something on leadership, or whenever people are talking about the role of leaders and what do leaders do, these are some of the words that tend to come up fairly frequently. Okay, these are some of the words that tend to emerge when people are talking about leaders and what leaders do. So leaders are meant to be innovative. They're meant to be kind of leading on innovation, and this could be a product innovation or a service innovation, a process innovation. They're meant to start to kind of be forward thinkers, and clearly some of these words and concepts are overlapping. But yeah, that's what they're meant to do. Leaders are meant to be transformational. They're meant to not be happy with the status quo. They're always looking to improve, find the next big challenge, take the organization and create an organization into the future. Okay, so that's another aspect of leadership that people very often talk about. Motivation, making sure that leaders have followers who are willing to kind of go with them and follow the path that they set out, and kind of help them to deliver the vision and the strategy that they have in mind. Leaders take decisions, particularly strategic decisions, or decisions about big investments, or strategic decisions about which markets or which products are going to be invested in. They take decisions about the structure and of the organization, and where there might be divestments or where there might be acquisitions. I mean, these are big, significant decisions that leaders are meant to take, okay? Strategy and the role of leadership in strategy, I think, is fairly obvious. Again, leaders are meant to have the vision about where the organization's going, and kind of set out this vision and communicate this vision quite clearly. And the other aspect to leadership is power. So leaders are inherently able, through their charisma, through their position, through their vision, through their ability to communicate. They are able to draw in power, and then where this power gets used, leaders will engage in political activity with a small p, both within the organization, but also in terms of outside the organization. But this is about, leaders attract power and then use their power, ideally for the benefit of the organization and the people in and the stakeholders around the organization. Okay, so these are some of the kind of typical things that leaders are meant to do. All right, that's kind of what you have today. Weifeng, if I could ask you to move on to the next slide. And then if I were to put a filter, or if I were to put a lens on some of those words, then there are different perspectives. There are different styles by which leaders can exercise those things that I've just talked about. There are different ways in which leaders do the things that I've just outlined. So if you're a transformational leader, then you're interested in understanding what is it that the organization needs to do in order to move forward. You set out the vision, you get people to buy into that vision, you communicate and convince people to buy into that vision, and then the transformational leader will do all of the things that I've talked about, but with a view to bringing about a significant change through the organization. If you talk about authentic leadership, then these are leaders who, no, Weifeng, not yet, it's moved on. If you talk about authentic leadership, then you're talking about a leader that is true to themselves. You're talking about a leader that is able to have a set of values, have a set of a personal standard, if you like, and they are true to that internal mission and vision that they have. Distributed leadership, this is about leaders who want to ensure that the leader isn't just at the pinnacle of the organization. It isn't a single person at the top of the organization, but distributed leadership is making sure that leaders are found throughout the organization, and that leadership and the role of leadership is distributed throughout the organization. And so you have high levels of coordination that are needed in a distributed leadership environment. Network leadership is something that I've been working on and researching personally, because I'm very interested in how leaders within an organization form networks and how these networks operate, and how these networks of leaders bring about change and transformation in an organization. So network leadership is how leaders combine and come together and coalesce around at various times. And the last one is ethical leadership. So this is looking at the ethical values that a leader has, and they put those values kind of first and foremost, and then live by those values. And I say that these are just some perspectives of leadership, okay? There are many more perspectives of leadership, but I've just picked out a handful to kind of give you, to illustrate where this is going. Weifeng, next, if you could, thank you. If you look at leadership, the fundamental underpinning assumption of leadership, however you cut it, and whichever style of leadership or whatever the activity is, leaders operate in relation to, and the word that's used most often is followers. Okay, so leaders operate in relation to a set of followers. And as someone said, a leader that doesn't have followers is someone who is simply out for a walk. In other words, if you don't have, as a leader, and you're a self-styled leader, if you don't have people that are coming behind you to make your vision, your strategy, to implement your ideas, if they aren't following and coming in behind you, then quite frankly, there is a question as to whether there is a leadership thing going on there or not. Otherwise, you're pretty much a lone wolf on your own, and that's not deemed to be leadership, right? So the fundamental underpinning assumption of every aspect of leadership is that leadership is carried out in relation to other people, okay? And here's where I think we have reached in terms of where we are with the introduction of AI and machine learning and smart systems and the whole Internet of Things and all of these technologies that are now coming online and coming on stream, and organizations are absorbing. So I think if I could ask you to hit the button again, please. So what you have going on in organizations now is the introduction of algorithms, the introduction of digital technologies, where you don't have human beings as followers anymore. What you have is an algorithm, And actually, when you start to think about what these algorithms are doing, and I'm going to expand on this as we go forward. But when you think about what these algorithms are doing, actually, very often what you have are the algorithms are kind of almost agnostic to any of these forms of leadership. You can't ask a leader to be political with an algorithm. Now you can embed politics or embed bias into the algorithm. I accept that. But once this algorithm is up and running, once the AI system is up and running, what does being an authentic leader mean? What does it mean to be ethical and to have a network? Now, these concepts for me themselves are starting to change and starting to need to be almost redefined when you start getting into the realms of looking at how AI is coming into organizations. So some of these styles of leadership are still important, but how they get exercised in organizations, how they get exercised by leaders, I think is now starting to change. And research is only just getting going to understand what these changes mean in terms of some of these concepts. Weifeng, if I could ask you to move on to the next piece. What I'd like to do is really kind of ask you to reflect on some of the things that I've been talking about leadership in terms of what leaders do and in terms of the different styles of leadership and what this means in terms of this emerging digital wave, this emerging AI wave that is hitting organizations. And I thought, let me do this in some ways by kind of talking through 3 cases, okay? Very diverse cases, and just to kind of get you to think about how leadership is starting to be affected and how leaders are starting to be affected in terms of what they can and can't do, in terms of some of the challenges they face in this emerging kind of AI world. So in story A, or in the first case, Weifeng, if I could ask you to
case number 1.
Case 1. The names are made up, by the way. They're not real people. The stories are real, or amalgamations of some organizations that I know, but the names are not real. So let me tell you about case 1. Let me tell you about Lara. So this organization is one that I'm a bit familiar with, because actually this organization used to operate on my high street. Okay, so it was a local business, and it was a traditional bricks and mortar business. It was an antiques business, and over the years I'd popped in and every once in a while and had a look around to see what there was. And it was run by this lovely woman who was a stalwart on the high street, and as I say, ran the business there for the better part of 28 years. And then one day I noticed a closing down sign went up, which caused me huge concern, because clearly the effect of COVID on the high street is bad enough. So you don't want shops and local businesses closing. So as one does, I went in and started a little conversation with her and asked why, what was going on. And what was really interesting is her rationale and kind of the backstory for why, after 28 years, she was giving up on her high street shop and her livelihood, in effect. And it turns out that the high street was changing, and it was obvious it was changing. But what she said is that until about 18 months previously, maybe 2 years previously, there was a bank on the high street. In fact, there were 2 banks on the high street. And what she said was there was always traffic coming through, i.e. there was always footfall, because people were coming to the bank. And because people were coming to the bank, there were always people on the high street who would drop in to buy a present or to take a look in the shop, and they might pick up something or see something and then come back on the weekend and with their partner or their other half and decide and then buy it, because antiques and those sorts of items are not for everyone. And what she was saying is that you had one bank close and then you had the second bank close, and in fact the footfall pretty much then dried up. And what she decided was that actually, as the leader of this business, in effect, as the owner and the leader of this business, she decided enough's enough. I can't be bothered paying the rent anymore and struggling in this way. And actually, she decided to move her business, which, as I say, was a purely bricks and mortar business, to a completely online business. So she created a website, and now you can buy her antiques online. And she said, I'm just going to kind of go down embrace this digital world that really she knew very little of till now. Let me contrast that with Weifeng, if I could ask you to hit this again. So this again is an amalgamation of many organizations, some of which you might recognize. So here's a stalwart of the high street, been around for well over 100 years, bricks and mortar to start with, now also has a website and an online presence. But if you're the leader of this business, it's not quite as simple as saying, I'm going to shut up shop and I'm going to go completely online, even if you know it's the right thing to do. For a leader of this kind of business, it's really difficult because you're shrinking. The business is shrinking, but really you can't initially perhaps do the really radical surgery that's needed, because Amazon and other online retailers are cherry picking. In fact, they're not even cherry picking anymore. They're just taking larger and larger chunks of the business. So you've got a shrinking market, an uncertain future. But as a leader in this environment, you also have a social commitment, because if you were to close down every one of your retail outlets and go completely online, actually the social effects of that can be hugely devastating, because many high streets, in many high streets, your outlet is the anchor outlet. And if you get rid of that anchor outlet, the entire high street and then that town implodes. So taking decisions about how you're going to lead into the future and what your strategy is going to be is really, really difficult. It's really challenging. And part of what we're doing at Brunel, if I may make a plug, is we're actually looking at putting a program together to start to get people to think about how you deal with some of these knotty problems. Weifeng, if I could ask you to go again, please. And you'd have thought, hang on a minute, if you've got all these issues with all these old brick and mortar businesses, surely it must be easier if you're a unicorn. Surely it must be easier if you're already a platform business and you don't have all this history and you don't have all this stuff that's 120-year-old stuff that's dragging you back and and pulling you down. But actually, what you start to see that even with these new platform businesses, they themselves are facing some fairly significant challenges. So yes, they are successful. Yes, their market share is growing. Yes, they can begin to see significant amounts of growth. But the challenges that the leaders of these organizations face are one of perception. Now, you could argue that actually, as consumers, do we really care that workers don't have the rights, and that do we really care that for example, if we take Boohoo, and if you've been following, I'm talking about I'm not picking on any one organization or industry, okay? I'm just giving you stuff which is in the public domain. If you look at the way Boohoo treated its employees during this COVID period in Leicester, there's an awful lot that was written about how they behaved. So there are different sets of challenges that these organizations have, even though they are growing. And so there are issues around, what is ethical behavior? So if I come back to those styles of management and those aspects of management, leadership management, those aspects of leadership that I was talking about, what does it mean to be authentic? What does it mean to be ethical? What does it mean to be transformational, but not exploitative? These are things that I think some of these businesses are going, and some of the leaders of these businesses are really going to have to take on board if they're going to come through as and being recognized, not just as being financially successful, but socially successful as well. So I give you this because I think the whole notion and the concept of leadership is starting to change. Weifeng, if I could ask you to move on. So yeah, go ahead, Weifeng.
Yeah, so yeah, as Ashley mentioned at the beginning, that we are working very closely to look into this area, and then we come up with a survey which is purely for research purpose. So would you, if you could please kindly spend just a very few, 3, maximum 5 minutes, 4 minutes, just click this link. I think the organizer already put a link in the chat area. So just click the link, and then if you could please just have a look at the survey. We are looking at the AI readiness for organizations, your organizations. Yes, just yeah. Atlaf, Mohammed, have you put it there already?
Yes,
I have sent that to everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Shall I give another minute before we start, Ashley?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what I was thinking. Another minute, and we really would appreciate it if people would take a few minutes to answer this survey. It would really help our research, and as I say, we'd be happy to share the results with you. Okay. Why don't we move on, and hopefully people can continue filling in the survey as we're speaking. So thank you for those who've already done that. Weifeng, if I could ask you to move to the next slide, please. So what I want to do is move on to managers and management. Again, if I could ask you to move on. Yeah. So again, if you kind of look at what the managers are supposed to do, this is the sort of list that comes up every time you ask people, what is it the managers do? And from the work that we've done and the research that we've done, I think it's fair to say that our view is that managers are probably, as it says here, in the front line of the effects of AI. It's likely to affect people who are deemed to be managers probably more than just about anybody else. And we've looked at managers, whether they're doing low skill, repetitive kind of work, whether we're doing activities that require some level of knowledge and training and experience. If you're a professional person that's done a degree or have got some kind of qualification, if you're a member of an institute and you're a professional person and it's taken some years to learn your trade, managers even in those situations are going to be affected. And equally, managers who are where a large part of the job is dealing with people at some kind of emotional, human kind of level, then even those jobs and those managers are likely to be affected by these technologies. So if you look at kind of traditional managerial activities, it's about making sure that the people in your team are organized, that they know the rules and understand how they're meant to operate. If they've got a problem, they can come to you to help resolve the problem. You might empower them to resolve problems themselves, but if there's something which they struggle with or that they've never come across before, they might come to the manager to help resolve that issue, particularly if it's an interpersonal issue between members on a team. Around planning, allocating resources. So this is about the manager deciding kind of where the investment is going to go and how resources are going to be allocated, where people are going to put their time, where people are going, where people are going to stop putting an effort. So you can begin to see the managers get involved with all of these things, right? Managers usually, traditionally, if you look at the textbooks, managers don't necessarily come up with the strategy, but they're definitely at the heart of implementing the strategy. They are responsible for rewards and sanctions or punishments. I mean, these are the things that managers are meant to be out there and doing, okay? And then when you introduce this notion of AI and you start to say, so how are these things going to be affected? How are the people who are doing these things going to be affected? Okay, and what I wanted to kind of highlight to you was some of the consequences. Weifeng, if I could ask you to move to the next slide. Some of the consequences of introducing these technologies to on managers, on the people doing these sorts of jobs. So gigification is a term that we coined. We've done a paper on the gigification of work, and we covered it in a previous session. But this is really saying that increasingly from our research, we're finding that managers are management jobs and management functions, particularly full-time roles, are increasingly becoming more gig-like. And what that means is work in an AI world or work in a digital world can be kind of decomposed into very minute pieces of activity, very minute tasks that can be automated. And the more you kind of increase the kind of automation of someone's job, the human aspects of that job kind of become standardized to the extent that actually anybody could do that piece of work. And if you get to a point where anybody can do that kind of piece of work, that job becomes it takes on all the characteristics of a gig job. Okay, so the gigification of work, I think, is one that we've noticed. Increasingly, we find people talking about algorithmic management. In other words, algorithms actually do the job that managers were doing, whether it's planning, allocating work. So if you think about Uber's app allocating a driver to a particular passenger, you don't need a human being anymore. You don't need a manager dealing with this anymore or managing a team of people who are doing this anymore. The app is actually planning, allocating, deciding, making all of these decisions about what resources are going to be allocated to which job. So algorithmic management is really undermining a lot of the functions that managers do. And where you have self-learning algorithms through machine learning and other sorts of technologies, then not only is the algorithm making the decision, but the algorithm's actually carrying out the decision. People may not, managers may not even be aware that this decision is being taken, other than knowing, perhaps getting a report at the end of the day about what decisions are taken. With digital tracking, whether it's a wearable device or I says trying to wave his arm around, whether it's a digital device or whether it's other forms of digital tracking, increasingly managers are seeing what is going on in terms of what people are doing, which gives them greater levels of control. So perhaps you don't need as many managers, because whereas the old notion of a span of control was kind of 7 to 9 people. Now a manager sitting in one location, and it could be a remote location, could digitally track a much larger number of people to know who is doing what and what the levels of performance and efficiencies are. So potentially you need fewer managers. Jobs are becoming what I'm calling datafied. In other words, I am being given much more data about the job that I am doing, whether it's the number of hours I'm spending on emails, whether it's a breakdown of how many hours I'm spending in meetings, whether it's looking at what my output levels are in terms of articles or whatever it happens to be. Jobs are becoming much more datafied, i.e., people doing the job are getting feedback, data about their performance. So what that then means is I don't need a manager to tell me I'm falling behind. I know I'm falling behind, therefore I know I better do something about it. So this notion that I need a manager to plan my work or to tell me I'm underperforming or overperforming, I don't need that anymore, because I'm getting the information that tells me that anyway. And therefore I can self-correct. This whole notion of governance is being driven by data. So you've got to ask, what does managerial governance mean anymore? What is human judgment, and where does human judgment fit into this story? If everything is being driven by data, do I need a human being? Do I need a manager to tell me that I'm falling foul of certain rules or certain governance processes that are in place? And arguably, as algorithms come in and become part of the way we work around here, actually you've got to ask, is management a people practice anymore, or is it a human only practice? Or is management actually increasingly becoming the thing that machines do, and humans then respond to what the machine is saying? And I know there are all these dystopian views of people being fired by machine, and some recent court cases have meant that that there are some protections in place, but you can begin to see that management is not something that has to be done by people alone. Employee participation can improve, because people can be more involved in some of the decisions that affect them, or perhaps can be removed from the decisions that affect them. And the lastly is changes to the psychological contract. And I covered this in a previous talk that I did based on some research that we've done, where the introduction of algorithms and of platform businesses and platforms to mediate the employee interactions can very much isolate people. And perhaps one of the consequences for managers is finding ways as to how to keep the human face and the human parts of what is left in anyone's job. Weifeng, if I could ask you to move to the next. So yeah, in some ways, what I was trying to get across here, and I'm not going to go through all of these because I think I've talked about them in various ways. I might pick on some more than others, but I think what the challenges that managers face in dealing with AI and the technology is, where decisions are being taken out of their hands, how do they still ensure that the people that are left and the people that are doing the work are still being treated fairly, are still being treated with a degree of equity in the work that's being done? How do they ensure that rewards are being distributed in a way that is meaningful and fair? Increasingly, people are faced with a significant job precariousness and financial vulnerability. How do we ensure as managers that the people in our team are being rewarded in a way that is meaningful to them? How do we motivate people? Motivating people when they are remote, in terms physically remote, motivating people who you may not know as you might know, your team. If you think back, even going 5 years, the team of people you worked with, you'd worked with them kind of day in, day out, and there was some consistency in that team. And you built up relationships with the people on your team, even if they were a virtual team and spread to another part of the world. You kind of generally dealt with the same people. But if jobs become gigafied, if you've got an increasing number of people who are contractors who come in, do a day's work and then leave, or if you've got people who are coming in and being paid, a piecemeal kind of rate, building those relationships is much more difficult. Control is something we've talked about previously, as is transparency. I think part of what managers need to do is to enable and give people transparency as to how decisions are being taken. And then this whole notion of governance, I think, is one where managers generally need to give much greater emphasis and focus on. If I could move on, Weifeng, to the next bit. So what I want to move on to is looking at what does culture mean in an AI environment, and really I think in some ways the jury is still out on this one, because I think we're only just coming to understand some of these things. So what I'm about to tell you is some very early insights from some of the work and some of the reading and some of the discussions that we've been having within the center. If I could ask you to go to the next slide, please, Weifeng. So if we're talking about organizational culture, the next bullet, please, Weifeng. Thank you. Well, if you look at traditional organizations, then I would argue that they tended, an organization's culture tended towards ubiquity. It tended to be kind of similar. I don't mean the same, but I mean similar in different parts of the organization. So you would have, for instance, if I give you McDonald's, if you went into a McDonald's restaurant and you went into the McDonald's headquarters, of course, they'd be laid out differently and whatever have you. But you would imagine, and having done some work with McDonald's in the past, and even in different countries, the kind of culture of McDonald's in the head office and the culture of McDonald's in the restaurants are not hugely dissimilar. You know, people very often who are in the head office have tended to come up through the restaurants. So, and they've tended to bring those behaviors, to bring those levels of standards of behavior, standards of dealing with people as being quite similar. So I would argue that in the past, organizational cultures tended to gravitate towards a kind of similar and have a similar level, if you like, in the organization. Weifeng, if I could ask you to go again. I think with the introduction of platform businesses or platforms in businesses, I think we're likely to see much bigger disparities in the cultures of these organizations. And I don't know if you can pick up the background slide, but you know, the photo of the office. And again, I'm not picking on any one organization. I'm just saying these are kind of just to illustrate as much as anything else. But you know, it's a picture of an office of the head office of Deliveroo, and you can imagine working in that office, working in that environment would be fairly pleasant, and it looks like any other very modern 21st century kind of office with nice open spaces, etc. And in the background, you have a Deliveroo driver or cyclist, deliverer. You know, and if the graininess is not the graininess of the picture, but it's to show that this person is either cycling through rain or snow, and you begin to see that actually there's quite a big contrast in how different people in an organization kind of experience that organization. And therefore, I would argue that there are potentially significant differences in culture and behaviors in these organizations. And Weifeng, if I could ask you to go to the next slide. So what I wanted to kind of talk to you about here was looking at, so what are some of the drivers of these differences in culture. And as I kind of alluded to a few minutes ago, one way of thinking about culture is about the way we do things around here. And you can begin to see that the way we do things perhaps in the center is very different to the way we do things out in the field. And yes, those differences have always been there. It's not new. But I think the extent of the differences, the gap in those differences, I think are likely to be much more significant than they have been. Another way of thinking about culture is the values, attitudes, and behaviors. And you know, you hear organizations that have these kind of mission and vision statements, where on the one hand, the values are around, you know, doing good and being a benefit to society and doing positive things to society and helping the society that we're in. And on the other hand, you see the behaviors on the ground, or the behaviors are, well, we can't hold an ethics committee together for more than a week. And anybody that is critical of some of the things that of the ethical stances may well not continue working in this organization. You have situations where, on the one hand, we're here to do good for society, but actually what we're going to do is take data and then sell it and market it in ways that where those very individuals who are our members may well be exploited or may well be taken advantage of. So you see the values kind of going one way and the behaviors going a different way. And that in itself begins to shape how people think about the organization and how the values are. You've got inward and outward facing symbols, you know. So the inward symbols might be looking quite plush and might be quite warm and inviting, but actually the outward facing symbols are one of people turning up and working in some fairly dire conditions, where you have people working on a production line and not being able to go to the loo. You know, and these aren't you know, the various things I'm going to be talking about. They're overlapping, but you begin to see that, you know, this shapes the culture of the organization. Algorithms give huge amounts of control in terms of both hard and soft control systems. You have different routines that start to come up. You know, managers are no longer taking decisions. Managers don't need to have the, you know, the Monday morning meeting or the team meeting or the away day, because what are you going to do? Have an away day with your 3 algorithms? You know, you don't have those rituals and routines anymore that bring people together and that create some level of solidarity. So for me, there is some concern about the history and the stories that get told about the organization, and stories and history are some of the foundational blocks of any organization's culture. And, you know, what are these stories that we're going to be telling? Weifeng, if I could ask you to go again. If I could spend a couple of minutes, I know we started a little bit late, just ask people to have a quick look at this. This is the second part of the survey. And if I could ask you to, Altaf will put in the link.
I've just sent that through the chat.
Lovely, yeah. Thank you, Altaf. And while Altaf is doing that, and whilst you're completing the survey, given the time, there's just one more slide. So, Weifeng, if we could move to the last slide, please. Thank you. So this is really just some thoughts to close on. So what is it that leaders and managers should be doing going forward? I think at the core of this is understanding the power of data. My big concern is boardrooms and people that in boardrooms today still don't understand the power of data and how that data can be used to inform the strategy and inform the transformation that they have to go through. I think a key role for managers and leaders is mitigating bias in the algorithms, bias in the data, bias in the training, bias in just about everything that the organization does. And I guess the flip side of bias is ethical practices. So making sure that what the organization does is in and of itself ethical. I think increasingly leaders and managers need to really think about stakeholder networks, not just inside the organization, but outside the organization. And building those networks is going to be hugely important inside the organization for creating a positive environment for the various forms of workers, employers, contractors, workers, temporary workers that come in. But building those stakeholder networks is also going to be hugely important for creating and nurturing an ecosystem, because I think increasingly organizations need to, in a digital platform world, need to focus on building ecosystems. And without those ecosystems, I think it's going to become increasingly difficult to compete and in the longer term survive. Weifeng, if I could ask you to hit the button again. Yay, we're at the end. If I could, and I appreciate we started a few minutes late, so I'm happy to continue on for a few more minutes if that doesn't cause you, the attendees, any inconvenience. But if you have any questions, please post them in the chat or yeah, and I will do my best to address them.
Hi, Ashley. There is one question which is not actually for you, but for us to answer. And that question is, I missed the previous webinar, business models and AI. Is there a way to view a recording, please. Yes, most of the talks which are recorded, they are edited first, and then they are published on YouTube channel of BCS. So you will be able to see something there. But this again depends on the speaker's willingness to share the content. So even if the content was recorded, but if later on the speaker changes the mind and asks us not to publish it, then that video will not be available. But by and large, we get the approvals and they are published on the YouTube channel. There is no other question that I can see.
Okay, great. Thank you. Weifeng, if I could ask you to hit the button again, please.
So
it's really an opportunity to say thank you. That's my LinkedIn. Weifeng has brought me into the 21st century by making it a QR code, but you can find me on LinkedIn. It'd be lovely to catch up with attendees. Equally, if there are any questions that you have following this, I'd be more than happy to address them. If you missed a previous session, or if there are points that you wanted to clarify from a previous session, do reach out. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Yeah.
And I would like to thank Ashley and Professor Ashley and Dr. Weifeng Chen on behalf of BCS London West Branch for this series on AI, which is topic of the day. And every organization you go to, you hear something about AI, and the future is for AI, and it is going to continue for a very long time for the benefit of the society, for the organizations, and for the individuals. We have lots of other talks planned. You can visit our website to uh, to uh, to know what those details and register for the future events. We also have the LinkedIn page. Please look for BCS London West Branch and join and make the whole page interactive. We are here to help. You can contact either Altaf, who is our branch chair, or you can contact me, and we'll try and help you as much as we can. Thank you very much, all of you, and thank you very much to the speakers.
Thank you. Thanks, Ram. Thank you, Altaf, for the invitation to come and speak and giving us the opportunity to speak to BCS members today. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
All the best, everyone.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.